The bell above the shop door jingled as I stepped inside. The air had that musty, old book smell, and it felt like time stood still in there. I hadn't even noticed this little store before, and I'd walked down this street plenty of times. It felt like it had just appeared. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe nothing, but something about the place pulled me in. The shelves were packed with all kinds of random stuff. Old books, ticking clocks that didn't quite sync up, and strange knickknacks. My eyes wandered over everything, and that's when I saw it. Sitting between a beat-up radio and a rusted pocket watch was an old camera. It looked ancient, the kind my grandparents might have used. The leather strap was worn, and the body had some scratches, but it still looked in surprisingly good condition, like it had been waiting for me. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. Photography had never really been my thing, but there was something about this camera. It felt different. "How much for this?" I asked, heading over to the counter. The old man behind the counter barely looked up, his glasses perched low on his nose as he squinted at me. "That old thing? $20, he said, his voice scratchy. "But I'll warn you, it shows more than just pictures." I raised an eyebrow. "More than pictures? What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't smile, didn't even blink. "It shows the truth, kid. Be careful." I chuckled, pulling a 20 out of my wallet. Probably just a weird sales tactic to make the thing seem interesting, but whatever. I handed him the cash and left with the camera slung over my shoulder. Back at home, I took a closer look at the camera. It was pretty basic, old school film, nothing fancy. But to my surprise, there was already a roll of film inside. Maybe I'd test it out, see what this so-called truth was about. I pointed the camera at the mirror in my bedroom, adjusted the focus, and snapped a quick shot. The click of the shutter was satisfying, and I waited for the photo to develop, watching as the image slowly took shape. At first glance, it looked normal, just me, standing in my room, camera in hand. But then I noticed something off. In the corner of the frame, barely visible behind me, was a shadow, a figure standing just out of reach. But now, looking closer, I realized it wasn't just a figure. It was more detailed than I'd first thought. The shape, it wasn't random. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a person. The figure in the picture was pointing, not at me, but at the wall beside me. And in the reflection of the mirror, on that wall, there was something scratched into the paint. Letters, faint, but clear enough to make out. Liar. I hadn't told anyone about the fight I had with Josh last year. We hadn't spoken since, and I still felt guilty for the things I'd said in the heat of the moment. It was something I didn't let myself think about anymore, but here it was, staring back at me through the camera. Before I could even process it, I heard the door creak open behind me. I flinched, still on edge, and turned to see my mom standing there with a basket of laundry. "Ryan, what are you doing? You've been up here for ages." She set the basket down on my bed, looking at me with that worried mom expression I knew too well. "Everything all right?" I opened my mouth to answer, but my eyes flicked to the photo still in my hand. Should I tell her about it? I mean, who would believe that a camera was showing things like this? Liar written on the walls. She'd think I was nuts. "Mom, look at this," I said, handing her the photo. "There's something weird about it." She squinted at it for a moment, then frowned. "That's a nice picture of you, but what's that in the background? Looks like writing." "That's what I'm saying. It's this camera. It's showing things that shouldn't be there. Things from the past." She looked at me for a second longer than I was comfortable with, but handed the picture back. "You're probably just creeping yourself out. Maybe it's some kind of weird film effect." I wanted to believe that, but something about the picture felt too real. Before I could think it through, I raised the camera again. "Let me take a quick shot of you," I said, trying to sound casual. I needed to know if it would show something about her too. She gave me a confused look, but shrugged. I snapped the picture, the familiar click echoing in the room. As the photo started to develop, Mom turned back to folding clothes. The photo slowly took shape in my hand. There she was, smiling. But behind her, on the wall, something appeared. A faint image of a hospital bed, a child's room, and a younger version of her sitting beside the bed. I'd never seen that room before. And then it dawned on me, Mom had a miscarriage years ago, something she rarely talked about. I'd overheard her once, telling Dad when she thought I wasn't around. She never wanted me to know, but the camera knew. "Mom," I said, my voice shaky as I handed her the picture. "You might want to see this." She looked at it, her eyes widening. I watched her face change, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Mom, look at the background. That room, it's not our house. I think it's showing something from the past." She stared at it for a second, her eyes narrowing, and then she sighed, shaking her head. "Ryan, honestly, you're making something out of nothing. It's probably just a double exposure or some other photography thing. These old cameras can be glitchy." "It's not just a glitch. I think it's showing things people don't want to talk about. It's showing truths, Mom." She folded a shirt and didn't look at me. "Truths, huh? Like what? Ghosts or some nonsense?" I didn't answer. I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew she wasn't going to believe me, not right now. I'd have to prove it. "Just let me try something." I picked the camera up again. I needed to test it, see if it really was showing things about people. The kind of things they wouldn't just admit to. I needed another subject, maybe someone outside the family. I slipped the camera into my backpack, mumbling something about needing fresh air, and headed out the door before she could stop me. Down the street, I spotted Mr. Gordon sitting on his front porch, reading a newspaper. He was always there, same spot, same routine. Harmless old man, right? I wasn't so sure anymore. What if he had something to hide? I raised the camera casually as I walked past, pretending I was just taking random pictures. The familiar click of the shutter felt heavier this time. I didn't stop walking, just headed down the block to a quiet spot where I could wait for the photo to develop. As the image slowly formed, my stomach twisted. There, in the photo, was Mr. Gordon, sitting just as I'd seen him. But his face wasn't calm and relaxed like it had been. In the picture, his expression was twisted into something ugly, his eyes wide and terrified, his hands gripping something tightly, a briefcase. And standing behind him in the photo, though no one had been there in real life, was a man. The figure was dark, looming over Mr. Gordon like a shadow of his past. My hands shook as I stared at the photo. That wasn't the man I'd seen casually reading on his porch. Something about that image told a different story, a story he didn't want anyone to know. I shoved the picture into my backpack, the weight of the camera suddenly feeling more dangerous. This wasn't just a trick of light or an old glitch. This thing was showing exactly what people wanted to hide. Back at home, I tried explaining it to Mom again, showing her the new picture. "Look at Mr. Gordon. This isn't just a regular picture. There's something else going on here." She glanced at the photo and shrugged. "He probably just had a bad moment, or maybe you caught him off guard. You're reading into it too much, Ryan. You know how those crime shows mess with your head." "But Mom, I'm telling you, it's not normal." I pushed the picture toward her again. "Every photo I take shows things people don't want to admit. Look, I don't know what it is yet, but there's something about this camera. It's showing things." She gave me that skeptical, half-amused smile. "And you're sure it's not just your imagination running wild? Honestly, Ryan, you've got too much time on your hands." I bit back my frustration. She wasn't going to believe me until she saw it for herself. But what would it take to make her see? The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that the camera had more to show me. The image of Mr. Gordon gripping that briefcase with that look of fear was burned into my mind. But what if that was just the beginning? I decided to test it again. This time, I'd go back to Mr. Gordon's house, see if anything else popped up. As I walked past his porch, Mr. Gordon was there again, just like the day before. Same spot, same routine. Only today, he wasn't as calm. His newspaper was folded in his lap, and he was frowning at something in the distance. I pretended to be messing with my phone, but I discreetly raised the camera, aiming it at him. Another quick snap, the click barely audible over the soft hum of the street. He didn't even notice. Once I was out of sight, I ducked behind a tree and waited for the photo to develop. As the image slowly revealed itself, my pulse quickened. There he was again, sitting on his porch. But this time, his face wasn't calm at all. In the photo, Mr. Gordon looked furious. His mouth was open, mid-yell, and he wasn't alone. Standing on the other side of the fence was Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor from 2 doors down. She looked startled, like she'd just been on the receiving end of his anger. But it wasn't just Mrs. Thompson he was yelling about. There, perched on the fence between them, was a cat, Mrs. Thompson's cat, from the looks of it. Mr. Gordon's hand was raised like he was shooing the poor thing away, his face twisted in disgust. I stared at the photo, trying to piece it together. Yesterday, he'd been calm and collected, but the camera had shown that lurking fear behind his eyes. Today, it showed anger. And if the picture was right, Mr. Gordon wasn't just some harmless old man. He hated cats, maybe even hated his neighbors too. So Mr. Gordon's not a fan of cats, huh? I muttered to myself. The photo made it crystal clear. He didn't just dislike them, he was downright furious about that cat being on the fence. I stuffed the picture in my backpack. How much of this was real? What if he really had it out for Mrs. Thompson and her cat? Was this the camera showing me who people really were beneath the surface? Back home, I paced my room, still holding the camera. It didn't just capture moments, it exposed people, their secrets, their true feelings, the things they tried to hide from everyone else. "Mom," I called, walking into the kitchen where she was chopping vegetables. "I think this camera is showing me more than I thought. I took another picture of Mr. Gordon today." She barely looked up. And it showed him shouting at Mrs. Thompson about her cat, like he's furious. I didn't see it happen in real life, but it was there in the photo. Ryan, honestly, you're telling me Mr. Gordon's some kind of cat hater now? That man's been nothing but polite. I think you're just seeing what you want to see. I scowled. I'm serious, Mom. Yesterday, the camera showed something weird too. This thing, it's not just taking regular photos. She set the knife down and finally looked at me, eyebrows raised. And what exactly do you think it's showing then? I think it's showing the truth about people, who they really are, what they've done, what they think, all the stuff they try to hide. Mom sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. Ryan, I don't know what's gotten into you, but I think you're reading way too much into this. Sometimes people just have bad moments. Maybe Mr. Gordon had a rough day. Doesn't mean he hates cats. She still didn't believe me, but I knew what I saw, and I had the photos to prove it. At baseball practice the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos, about what the camera had shown me so far. Mr. Gordon's anger, my mom's secret. Everything the camera captured wasn't what I saw on the surface. It was what was hidden underneath. I arrived early, tossing my gear on the bench and pulling out my helmet when I heard someone call out to me. "Yo, Ryan!" Josh jogged over, his usual grin plastered on his face. He hadn't changed a bit since our fight last year, but I still couldn't shake the guilt that nagged at me whenever I saw him. Part of me thought about the camera, about taking a picture to see what it might show, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face whatever truth it might reveal about Josh. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound normal as I fumbled with my gear. The camera was stuffed in my bag, half hidden under my uniform. Josh spotted it immediately. "No way! Is that one of those old vintage cameras?" He reached over, pulling it out before I could stop him. "Yeah, it's just an old camera I found," I said, trying to play it off. He turned it over in his hands, looking impressed. "Dude, this is sick. You could take some old school pictures. I'd look awesome in one of those vintage shots. Come on, take one of me." He grinned, striking a dramatic pose with his bat resting on his shoulder. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to snap a picture and have the camera show me something I didn't want to see. But Josh was persistent. "Come on, man, just one. Let's see how cool I look. Vintage style." I rolled my eyes. "Fine." I lifted the camera, lining up the shot. "But don't blame me if you end up looking ridiculous." He smirked. "Yeah, right. I'm gonna look like a legend." I snapped the picture, and Josh went back to grabbing his own gear while the photo started to develop in my hands. What if it showed something bad? What if Josh wasn't who I thought he was? The image finally came into focus, and there was Josh, standing in the same pose, looking every bit like the show-off he was. But it wasn't the pose that caught my attention. It was what was happening behind him. In the background of the picture, just out of focus, I saw myself. Except, it wasn't me from now. It was me from the past. I was sitting in the bleachers, and next to me was Josh, leaning in close to another one of our friends, whispering something while glancing over at me. Both of them were laughing. The picture was showing a memory, one I hadn't even known about. Josh was talking behind my back. He was making fun of me, and the look on his face wasn't friendly. It was smug, like he enjoyed whatever joke he was telling at my expense. "See?" Josh said, pulling me out of my thoughts. "I bet I look awesome in that. Let me see." I hesitated, my grip tightening on the photo. I didn't want him to see what the camera had shown me. I wasn't even sure I could process it yet. It's still developing," I lied, quickly shoving the picture into my bag. "I'll show you later." Josh shrugged, clearly not concerned. "Cool, man, can't wait to see it. I'm gonna look like a beast." I forced a smile, but inside, I felt sick. How long had he been talking behind my back? Was this just one time, or had there been more? The camera wasn't just showing me people's secrets. It was showing me things I wasn't ready to know. On the way home, I ducked into the corner store. I grabbed a juice from the fridge and headed for the register. But as I stood there waiting, my eyes flicked to the people around me. The camera could show anyone's secrets, right? I hadn't used it on anyone outside of my own circle. But what if I tried it on strangers? People I didn't know at all. I shoved my juice in my bag, feeling the weight of the camera again. I was getting used to the way it made my heart race, the rush of adrenaline that came with every photo. Outside the shop, I spotted an old lady crossing the street, slowly making her way toward the bus stop. She looked harmless enough, dressed in a long coat and carrying a big shopping bag. I hesitated for a second. It felt wrong to take someone's picture without them knowing, but what harm could it do? She was just an old lady. What could she possibly be hiding? I raised the camera and snapped a quick picture. When the image finally came into focus, I stopped dead in my tracks. My hand trembled as I stared at it. There she was, standing at the bus stop in the photo, but her face wasn't kind or gentle. It was twisted, her eyes narrowed into slits, and in her hand, where she had been carrying the shopping bag, she held something else. A knife. Was it just some weird effect of the camera? Or had this sweet-looking old lady actually done something horrible? The way she looked in the picture, her face so full of anger. It didn't match the image I had of her in real life at all. I stuffed the photo in my bag, feeling uneasy. How could the camera show something like that? I passed a guy standing outside a small cafe. He was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone, wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. He looked a little off, the kind of guy who you might think twice about walking past on a dark street. But I wasn't in the mood to judge based on appearances. Maybe the camera could show me if my gut feeling was wrong, or if it was right. Before I could talk myself out of it, I raised the camera and snapped a picture. The photo developed slowly, and I forced myself to stay calm as it came into focus. When the image was clear, I almost dropped it. There, in the photo, the guy wasn't standing casually against the wall anymore. He was mid-action, smashing the window of a store with a crowbar, his face twisted in rage, his hands full of stolen goods. A robbery? No way. I glanced back at the guy, still standing there, still scrolling on his phone like nothing was wrong. But the camera had shown something completely different. Was this what he'd already done? Or something he was planning to do? This wasn't just some fun experiment anymore. The camera was showing me things I had no business knowing, and now I wasn't sure what to do with the knowledge it had given me. That night, back in my room, I pulled out the two photos, the old lady with the knife and the guy with the crowbar. I stared at them, my mind spinning. The camera wasn't just revealing harmless secrets or little lies. It was showing people's darkest moments, the things they kept hidden, even from themselves. How much worse could it get? I tried the camera on a few more people, just to see if what I'd seen with the old lady and the guy outside the cafe was a fluke. But each time, it showed something I wasn't expecting. There was the guy at the bus stop, wearing a business suit, looking like your average 9-to-5er. I snapped a picture as I passed by. The photo showed him counting stacks of cash in the back of a shady-looking warehouse, surrounded by men who didn't look like the kind you'd want to mess with. The camera had exposed something dark. Maybe he was involved in some kind of illegal deal. Whatever it was, I didn't want to know any more about it. Then, there was the teenage girl at the corner of the street, laughing with her friends. The camera showed her alone, sitting on the edge of her bed, crying into her hands, a note torn up on the floor beside her. A pit formed in my stomach as I looked at the image. It wasn't just showing crimes or bad deeds. It was showing people's pain. By the time I got home, I couldn't stand it anymore. The more pictures I took, the more I realized that the camera wasn't just a tool. It was a curse. It showed me things I couldn't unsee, things I didn't want to know about people. I had to get rid of it. I headed back to the shop where I'd bought it. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. How do you explain to someone that their old camera is showing you things no one should see? But when I reached the door, my heart sank. The shop was closed, the shutters were down, and there was no sign of the old man. I tried the handle anyway, but it was locked. A sign hung on the door, closed until further notice. What was I supposed to do now? I needed to get rid of this thing, but it felt like the camera was tied to me, inescapable. I shoved it into my bag and walked away, hoping that maybe the shop would open again soon. A few days passed, and the camera stayed hidden in my room. I couldn't bring myself to take another picture, but it was always there, sitting in the back of my mind. Every time I saw someone on the street, I wondered what the camera would reveal about them. What secrets were they hiding? What kind of pain or darkness was lurking beneath the surface? Finally, on Friday, I decided to try the shop again. I couldn't keep this thing. I had to at least try to give it back. This time, the shutters were up, and the door was open. The shop looked just as dusty and cluttered as before, like nothing had changed. The old man was behind the counter, reading a newspaper like it was the most normal day in the world. I walked up, the camera heavy in my hands. "I need to return this," I said, my voice tight. The man looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. "Return it?" "Yeah," I said, setting the camera down on the counter. I can't keep it. There's something wrong with it. It's showing me things I don't want to see." The old man didn't seem surprised. He folded his newspaper and leaned forward, peering at the camera. "And what did you expect? It shows the truth, kid. That's what it does." I shook my head, but I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to know all these things about people. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That's the deal. I stared at him, frustration bubbling up. "So what? I'm stuck with it? I can't just give it back?" He tilted his head. "You can try, but it's not up to me. It's up to the camera." That night, after my encounter with the shopkeeper, I couldn't shake his words. It's up to the camera. What did that even mean? I was fed up with the cryptic nonsense. This thing had to go. I sat in my room, staring at the camera sitting innocently on my desk. It looked so harmless, but I knew better now. It had shown me too much, things I never wanted to see. My hands tightened into fists. I couldn't keep living like this, with the constant weight of everyone's secrets pressing down on me. I grabbed the camera. I had to end this. Sneaking downstairs, I found my dad's toolbox in the garage. A hammer. That would do it. If I smashed the camera to pieces, maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would end. I carried the hammer back upstairs, careful not to make any noise. I set the camera down on the floor of my room, staring at it for a long moment. Could it really be this simple? Just break it and move on? Before I could second guess myself, I raised the hammer and brought it down hard. The camera cracked under the impact, pieces of the lens shattering across the floor. I hit it again and again. Each strike felt like a release, like I was finally taking control of the situation. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "Ryan, what the hell are you doing?" I froze, the hammer still raised in my hand. I turned to see my mom standing in the doorway, her eyes wide in shock. She looked at the mess on the floor, the broken camera, the hammer in my hand, and then back at me. I stammered, not sure what to say. How could I explain this? That the camera was cursed, showing me things no one should see? She'd never believe me. "Are you out of your mind? Smashing things up in the middle of the night?" I lowered the hammer. "Mom, you don't understand. I had to destroy it." "Destroy it? Ryan, it's just an old camera." She knelt down, inspecting the broken pieces. "Look at this mess. You've completely lost it. I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't normal." I stood there, helpless, as she gathered up the pieces. "You need to get some sleep. We'll talk about this tomorrow." she said, her voice stern but tired. She placed the broken camera on my desk and left the room, clearly thinking this was just some teenage meltdown. I stood there, staring at the shattered remains of the camera. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was losing it. But at least it was over now. At least I'd destroyed it. I barely slept that night. My mind was buzzing with everything that had happened, from the shopkeeper's cryptic words to the images the camera had shown me. But at least it was gone. I could put this behind me, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up and rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion pull me down. I sat up, trying to shake off the fog in my head. That's when I saw it. The camera, sitting on my desk, completely intact, not a scratch on it. No way. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. It was impossible. I'd smashed it to pieces. I knew I had. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the camera. It felt cold, like it had just been pulled from a freezer. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, but it was as if nothing had happened. The lens was perfect. The body wasn't cracked. It was like it had never been broken at all. "Mom," I called, my voice shaky. "Mom, come here." She appeared at the doorway a moment later, her face tired and annoyed. "What is it now?" I pointed to the camera. It's back. It's not broken." She gave me a strange look, clearly not following. "What are you talking about? Ryan, you're not making any sense." I held up the camera. "Last night, I destroyed it. You saw me. You saw the pieces. But now it's like it never happened." She glanced at the camera in my hands, then back at me. "Ryan, I don't know what kind of joke you're trying to pull, but this isn't funny. I don't have time for this." With that, she turned and left the room, muttering something about needing a break. I stared at the camera. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dream. The camera wasn't done with me. I kept turning it over in my hands, staring at it, trying to make sense of everything. The shopkeeper's words, the things I'd seen, it was too much. I had to get rid of it, and I had an idea of how. Josh had been so interested in the camera at practice. He didn't know what it was capable of, and maybe, just maybe, if I gave it to him, the burden would shift. Besides, Josh would think it was cool, and he was always messing with old stuff like this. The next day at school, I found him near the lockers. He gave me that same goofy grin, like nothing had changed between us. Maybe I'd imagined the things the camera had shown me about him. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. "Yo, Josh," I called out, pulling the camera from my backpack. "I was thinking, you like this camera, right? You want it? I think you'd appreciate it more than I would." His eyes lit up. "Are you serious? Man, that thing's vintage." "Yeah, I'll take it." He grabbed it, inspecting it like it was some treasure. "You sure?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "It's yours, but just be careful with it, okay?" Josh laughed. "What's there to be careful about? It's a camera, dude. Here, let's test it out." He raised the camera before I could stop him. "I'll take one of you." "Wait." I tried to protest, but the click of the shutter cut me off. My heart dropped into my stomach. The camera whirred as it processed the image. "Relax, man. It's just a photo," Josh said, shaking his head. But I knew better. My pulse quickened as I watched the picture slowly develop. My fingers trembled when Josh handed it to me, and I stared at it, waiting for the reveal. There I was, standing by the lockers. But in the background, through the window behind me, I saw something else. A car. My mom's car. And inside, her and my dad, both of them, faces contorted in terror as their car crashed into something. The windshield shattered, their bodies thrown forward. I dropped the photo, my blood turning to ice. "Dude, what's up?" Josh asked, frowning. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't answer. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I just shoved the picture in my pocket and mumbled, "I gotta go," before taking off down the hall with the camera. I tried telling myself it wasn't real, that the camera was messing with me, but deep down, I knew. It wasn't just showing the past anymore, it was showing the future. Later that night, as I sat on the couch, my mom came into the room, grabbing her coat and keys. "All right, Ryan, I left you one of those TV dinners in the fridge. Just heat it up in the microwave, okay? I want you in bed by 8. Me and your dad will be back around 10. Mom, no, you can't go, please. She frowned, looking at me with concern. Ryan, what's wrong with you? You've been acting strange all week. I stood up, panicked. Something bad is going to happen. You and Dad, you can't go out. You'll get in an accident. Her expression softened, but there was a trace of frustration. Ryan, I'm over this. You've been watching too many scary movies. There's not going to be an accident. Your dad and I are just going out for a bit, okay? We'll be fine. No, Mom, I'm serious, I nearly shouted, the fear bubbling up inside me. The camera, it showed me. I saw it. You're going to crash. She sighed and shook her head. Enough with the camera nonsense. We'll be back later. Now, get yourself some dinner and get to bed. She kissed my forehead and grabbed her purse. Love you. As she walked out the door, the panic hit me like a wave. Mom, don't, I yelled, but she was already gone. I stood there. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I had to stop them. I grabbed the photo from my pocket and stared at it again. The twisted metal, the shattered glass. It felt like a warning. What was I supposed to do? The image of that crash, the shattered glass, and the terror on their faces played over and over in my head. The camera wasn't lying. I knew that much now. I grabbed the camera off my desk, its weight heavier than ever in my hands. My only chance was to go back to the shop. The old man had to know something more, something about how to stop this. Maybe there was a way to reverse it, or destroy it for real this time. I reached the shop just as the last light of day faded. The familiar jingle of the bell echoed as I shoved the door open, out of breath, the camera clutched tightly in my hand. The shop was exactly as I remembered, dusty, cluttered, like it existed in its own forgotten corner of the world. The old man was there behind the counter, just like before, reading the same crumpled newspaper. I need answers, I said, my voice shaky but firm. I slammed the camera down on the counter. You've got to tell me what's going on with this thing. How do I stop it? The old man finally looked up, his glasses glinting under the dim light. His eyes flicked to the camera and then back to me, his expression unreadable. Back again, I see, he muttered. Didn't take long for you to come crawling back, did it? This isn't a joke, I snapped. The camera, it's showing things. It showed me my parents in a car crash. If I don't stop it, they're going to die. I know they will. Please, you've got to help me. The old man sighed, folding his newspaper and setting it aside. I already told you, kid. The camera shows the truth. It reveals what's meant to happen. But I need to change it. There has to be a way. I can't just let them die. How do I stop the future from happening? You can't change the future, kid. Once you've seen it, the truth's out there. The camera doesn't just predict, it locks it in. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Locks it in? What the hell does that mean? You're saying I made this happen by seeing it? The more you use it, the more it takes control. The camera doesn't just show what's hidden. It shows what will happen. And once you've seen it, there's no turning back. No, that can't be true. There has to be something I can do. You can try to destroy it. But like I said before, it's not up to me. It's up to the camera. And trust me, it won't go down without a fight. I stared at the camera on the counter. It sat there, innocent looking, but I knew it was far from harmless. I had to stop this, no matter what it took. If the shopkeeper wasn't going to help me, I'd have to figure it out on my own. Before I could say anything else, the shopkeeper leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. One last thing, kid. You should know the camera can take something in return. Maybe not the way you're thinking. It won't just take your parents. It'll take you too. Everything you care about. If you keep using it, the more it consumes. I didn't want to hear anymore. Grabbing the camera, I turned and stormed out of the shop. I refused to believe it was hopeless. I could still stop it. I had to. My parents hadn't been gone for long. There was still time. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call my mom as I ran, but it went straight to voicemail. Pick up, I muttered to myself, dialing again and again, but nothing. No answer. The streetlights blurred as I sprinted down the sidewalk. I had to stop them before it was too late. I had to get to the intersection I'd seen in the photo, the one where the crash would happen. I reached the main road, gasping for breath, and spotted their car in the distance, just a few blocks away. There they were, my mom at the wheel, my dad in the passenger seat. They were approaching the intersection, the same intersection I'd seen in the photo. Mom, I screamed, waving my arms frantically. Stop! Don't go! They didn't hear me. They were too far away. I watched in horror as they approached the intersection, and for a split second, everything seemed to slow down. And then I saw it, a pair of headlights from the opposite direction, a car speeding toward the intersection. No! I screamed, running as fast as I could. Stop! But it was too late. The other car slammed into my parents' vehicle with a sickening crash, the sound of metal twisting and glass shattering filling the air. The force of the impact threw both cars into a violent spin, and my parents' car smashed into the streetlight on the corner, crumpling like a piece of paper. Time froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The photo, the crash, everything had happened exactly the way the camera had shown me. I stumbled forward, my legs like lead, as I made my way to the wreckage. Mom, Dad. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance and police cars blurred around me as I sat on the curb, numb. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The paramedics were swarming the wreck, pulling my parents from the twisted metal. They were alive, barely. But the damage had been done. The weight of it all crashed down on me. I had tried everything. But no matter what I did, no matter how hard I ran or how much I screamed, I couldn't stop it. The camera had locked in the future. The crash was always going to happen, and I couldn't change it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, a message from Josh. Josh, dude, how'd the photo turn out? You look okay? I didn't respond. My hand shook as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the camera. It sat there, innocent, almost mocking me. No scratches, no cracks, just as perfect as the day I'd found it. The truth was, I didn't know what to do anymore. The camera had shown me the future, and I had failed. I couldn't stop it. Hey son, you all right? A voice called out. I looked up to see one of the officers standing in front of me. He was older, with a thick mustache and tired eyes, the kind of face that had probably seen a lot of wrecks like this one. His uniform was wrinkled, and he seemed more annoyed than concerned as he stood over me. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. No, those are my parents in that car. The officer squatted down in front of me, looking me over. Tough break, but they'll be in good hands. Don't you worry. EMTs know what they're doing. What about you, though? You look a little worse for wear. I didn't respond. My hands were still gripping the camera tightly, and almost out of instinct, I lifted it to my eye. It was automatic at this point, a habit I couldn't stop. I looked through the viewfinder, the lens focusing on the officer in front of me. Hey, you shouldn't be messing with that right now, the officer said, frowning. Put it away, kid. But I didn't. I pressed the shutter, the familiar click echoing in my ears. The camera whirred as the photo developed, and I pulled it out with trembling fingers, staring at the image as it slowly came into view. There he was, the officer, squatting in front of me, just like he had been. But in the background of the photo, there was something else. Something wrong. The scene had changed. Behind him, in the picture, was a dark alleyway. The officer wasn't talking to me anymore. He was standing there with a handful of cash, shoving it into his pocket, while a man in a suit handed him a thick envelope. His face wasn't tired and sympathetic. It was cold, calculating. The kind of look someone wore when they thought they'd gotten away with something. The camera had shown me another truth. This officer wasn't just a cop. He was corrupt. I looked up from the picture, and the officer was still standing in front of me, completely unaware of what I'd just seen. He gave me a stern look, clearly impatient. You hear me, kid? I said, put the camera away. You've got enough to deal with without worrying about photos right now. My hands shook as I stuffed the picture into my jacket pocket, trying to keep my face neutral. Yeah, sorry, I mumbled, lowering the camera. The officer stood up, brushing off his pants. You'll be all right. Your parents are in good hands. Just sit tight and let the pros handle it. What was I supposed to do with this information? Should I tell someone? Who would believe me? A picture from an old camera wasn't exactly hard evidence, but it was the truth. I knew that much. As the officer walked away, I couldn't help but glance down at the camera again. It wasn't just a curse anymore. It was a weapon, and now it had shown me something I wasn't ready for. I sat in the hospital waiting room. My parents were in the back, being treated for their injuries. The doctors had told me they'd be okay, just bruised and shaken up. The car was totaled, just like in the picture. The camera had been right about everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Josh. Josh, hey man, everything cool? You good? I stared at the message for a long time before slipping the phone back into my pocket. How was I supposed to explain any of this to him? I couldn't even look at him, not after what the camera had shown me. And then it hit me, the shopkeeper. Maybe I had missed something. There had to be a way out of this, some way to finally get rid of the camera. I wasn't ready to give up yet. When I stepped back into the shop, the bell above the door chimed again. The place looked exactly the same as it had before. Dusty, old, stuck in time. The old man behind the counter barely looked up, but the second he saw me, his eyes narrowed. Back again? He said, his voice like gravel. Didn't I tell you? The camera's attached to you now. I know, I said, walking up to the counter and setting the camera down in front of him. But there's got to be a way to get rid of it. You said it's up to the camera, but there's got to be something else. He stared at me for a long time, his gaze flicking from me to the camera. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the counter. There's one way, but it's not easy. What is it? The camera won't leave you unless you find someone who wants it, someone who willingly accepts it. That's the only way. I blinked. You mean I have to give it to someone who chooses it, who actually wants it? He nodded slowly. The camera can't be tricked. Whoever takes it has to want it. If they do, the curse will pass to them. I had tried giving it to Josh, thinking maybe he'd appreciate it. But now that I knew the truth, I couldn't do it. I couldn't pass this on to someone else, not even to my on-off again friend. No one deserved this, not after what I'd seen. But if I didn't pass it on, I was stuck with it, forever. I can't do that. The shopkeeper shrugged like it didn't matter to him. Then you've made your choice. I walked home in silence, the camera dangling from my hand. The truth was clear now. There was no easy way out. I could try to destroy it again, but it wouldn't matter. The camera would always come back. It would always show me the truth, no matter how much I didn't want to see it. When I reached my house, I stood outside for a moment, staring up at the windows. My parents would be home soon. They were safe for now. The future, I didn't know what it held. Maybe it would be worse, maybe it wouldn't. But I knew one thing for sure. The camera wasn't done with me. I slid the camera back into my bag, feeling its familiar weight settle on my shoulders. It was still with me, and I wasn't sure I could ever be free of it. But for now, I would keep it. Maybe it was better to know the truth, even if it was terrifying. Sometimes, knowing the truth, no matter how awful, was better than living in the dark.